I'm so excited to be here tonight. And first things first, I guess, many thanks to Jeff Hunt for having me here. It's so funny to have the tables flip because usually he's a guest on my show, and now this past weekend, I've been his guest. So I'm immensely grateful for those opportunities. Thank you so much to Jeff and everyone else for this amazing summit. I've been having a blast so far. So I want to talk about a little history, actually, because anyone who watches Tipping Point knows I always end my show every night with a historical spotlight for some information that we can all take with us into the next day, because sometimes understanding history helps us to better understand ourselves, and therefore the headlines that we run into every single day, and they seem to get crazier and crazier. So one thing that got my attention when I was flying into Denver just yesterday morning, actually, was as I was looking out the window, I noticed all the beautiful cul-de-sacs and all the suburban growth, and I realized in the state of Colorado, there's so much land, there's so much opportunity here for growth and building, and I see it everywhere, and I really do love it. Because usually when you go to political conferences, gotta go to the East Coast. No hate on the East Coast, but I'm from California. I love the western side of things, so I'm glad to be out here. But what you notice when you go to the East Coast is, it's a little bit older over there, so more haphazard buildings, and sometimes you feel very condensed and squished. But out here in the West, lots of land. So talking about some history, and I want to talk about some growth and some old world, because Colorado still has a lot of history, despite all the new stuff I was talking about a second ago. So some fun trivia to kind of get us going right now. So tuberculosis, I know, why am I bringing up a bacterial lung disease right now, also known as consumption in the White Death? Well, if you ask the History Channel, they say tuberculosis put Colorado on the map. Now, I don't want to reduce all the history of Colorado to, like I said, a pretty nasty lung disease, but it did bring a lot of people to the state for the good air out here. One of those people is actually Doc Holliday. When he was on the run from the shootout at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona, running away from murder charges, he had tuberculosis, he had TB, he was called a lunger. He came out here for the good air and to hide from the law as well. So other fun history, you guys have Pikes Peak out here. It's about 14,000 feet elevation. There was the poet Catherine Lee Bates. She climbed the summit in the summer of 1893, and the poem that came from the beauty that she saw is what we now sing and refer to as America the Beautiful. So like I said, a lot of fun history. You guys also have the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park. That's where Stephen King, forget his politics for a second, but when he was at the hotel, I think it was going into the winter season, so I think he was pretty much the only one there, maybe he and his wife, and he saw this giant hotel. It was completely empty, and he thought to himself up the idea that became The Shining. So, like I said, a lot of fun stuff out here. Also, the Broadmoor Hotel. You also have the unsinkable Molly Brown. Her house is out here in Denver. And thanks to my mom, a shout out for my mom and dad, because growing up, they took us all over. There's pretty much no side of the western half of the United States we have not seen or been to, and I thank them immensely for that. My mom loves history. She calls herself a nature nerd. She loves nature parks, and all the rest. So a lot of this information is because of my mom, so I want to thank her for that. But then it gets to the point of, is that what conservatives are? Are we only looking backward? Are we not looking forward? A lot of our detractors would say so. You even go back to the early 20th century of writers like G.K. Chesterton fighting off those who say, you knuckle draggers, you cavemen, look into the future, we're the progressives, we're the ones moving forward and you're holding us back. So what does it mean to be a conservative? I love history, you guys love history. Is it such a bad thing to be looking backward? So I have actually a quote here from Edmund Burke, the 18th century's Edmund Burke. And he talks about what society is. He says it's a contract between those who've come before us, our ancestors, those who've preceded us in death, with those who are currently living, so all of us, fun stuff, and with those who are yet to come, the unborn, the future generations who are coming. So that's kind of the social compact that we have here. Now for liberals, what they do is they cut that off. They atomize you. They atomize all of us. For a plain liberal, it's more just the hyper-individualism of no unchosen bonds can bind me. Spouse, psh. Kids, psh. The unborn, psh. You have no claim on me. I'm my own sovereign, king of my own universe. If you get in my way, I'll sadly kill you, I guess, with abortion and euthanasia and all the other crazy stuff that we see being promoted right now, or even spiritual death, reproductive death in the form of the mutilation of kids, the LGBTQ movement that we see on the rampage. But again, cutting you off. You go further down that line, you have far leftist, and what do? They atomize even further. They break down the basic social unit, which is the family. So it's actually not the individual that stands alone against government, it's actually the family that stands alone against government, and then families together in their communities. The left breaks that apart because you have to necessarily break down the family in order for the state to grow. Because if you're in a tough spot financially, emotionally, physically, whatever you need, throughout history, you look to your family. They'd be the ones who'd care for you in those moments. Now a lot of people are distant, like I said, from spouses and parents and kids, and everyone's just doing their own thing. We're so atomized. So where do you look? You look to the government. Even some Republicans fall into that because the destruction of the family that really kicked up a notch in the 60s with the sexual revolution, I mean, that thing has just plowed through pretty much all of us. Even us on the right, it hasn't left us unscathed either, even though we're a lot better off than the left right now, as we can see. But again, that's the individual, you see the hyper-individualization, because again, for the left, the idea is government is their big their engine for change, social change. Social reengineering is basically what it is. So they have to crush you, they have to crush your family, and therefore the state, the leviathan of the state, can then grow. So that's something we stand against. However, being a conservative, though, is more than just saying no to all that. It's more than just being unchanging and saying, well, there's some beautiful time in the past that we can get back to. But that's not true either. Every time in the past, any historian out there will tell you there was good parts and bad parts, and you kind of have to wade through and see what virtues and what vices were more prominent in each age, and then you take that with you. As Edmund Burke says, almost the passing of the torch between those who came before us now and those who are yet to come. So you have, like I mentioned earlier, the 20th century philosopher and writer G.K. Chesterton. He talks about, kind of jokingly, but it's also kind of true, the job of the progressive is to ruin everything. Like I said, to just destroy, thinking that there's some utopia out there. It only ends in dystopia and countless corpses. I mean, we saw that especially in the 20th century, but on they go. But then the problem is sometimes for conservatives who think their job is just to hold to what has happened in the past, is then he says the job of the conservatives is then to take those messes and then not want to change from them and say, well, now this is my tradition. And what do you hear the joke right now for Republicans is what? We're a few years behind Democrats. We're kind of going off the same ledge with them, but just a little bit slower. So again, we go back to the question of, well, then who are we? Who are we supposed to be as conservatives? So once more, G.K. Chesterton, because I love the guy, so why not? He talks about the fence. He has an analogy about a fence. You're hiking through the forest, through the fields, and you see a fence, and you think, what's the deal with this fence? It doesn't look like it's holding anything in. Maybe it's all overgrown, and you can't really tell what the use of it is for. The progressive would just tear it down. He says the conservative job, though, is to look at the fence and to understand why it's there. To understand that first. If it's no longer necessary, you can take it down. But if it is necessary, keep it up. You don't want to be the progressive who takes down the fence and now a monster comes and eats you. Not a good thing. So that's kind of what we do as conservatives, is we sift and we search through history, through our theological traditions, and we understand the eternal truths, those that are unchanging. And then you see how that's supposed to affect you in the particularities of the time and place in which you live. So we're not just looking backwards, we're looking presently, and we're looking forward. We've got the whole shebang. It's the left that's stuck in their own little island over there. So that's who we are as conservatives. So, and as I mentioned, we kind of run into the crux of the problem, though, for some on the right. You kind of see a division. Some will say, well, you can't bring God into things. And one of my biggest issues, I'm pro-life. That's my main, that's the hill I will always die on, from protecting life from conception until natural death. And one thing that I hear from many well-meaning people on the pro-life side is, well, hey, pro-abortionists, we don't need God or religion to talk about why the unborn deserve their humanity and their human God-given rights. We can just use science. And science is great, but it's just one tool. But when you kick God out and you only rely on the scientific tools, you're giving the left's premise of scientific, godless materialism. Now you're playing on a rigged battlefield. You're fighting with one hand behind your back. When we talk about God and faith, whatever our religious tradition is, Judeo-Christian, Abrahamic faiths, we have to, it should infuse all of us. And what we do, whether we're talking about something as banal as taxes, or we're talking about foreign policy or cultural issues, We can't only bring up God when it's religious liberty issues and then forget about him everywhere else. Again, we're going to be in the left's game. We're going to be playing on their battlefield. We're saying we don't need to turn to God. And then sometimes, again, when I talk to even well-meaning people on the right, they'll say, well, doesn't that make you like the Taliban? You theocratic fascist. You can't bring God into this. You can't bring your religion. Everyone has their own conception of what the good is. But for those who think that, you've really drank the Kool-Aid of the air around you, the water all around you, of what the left has done to us for so long. You've drunk in their solipsism. We've been living in their moral framework for decades, but we've accepted their premise that that's neutrality, that that's unbiased, that it's nonpartisan. It's not. We are the exiles in Babylon, and we need to reclaim that. So when we talk about morality and God and anything and everything we do, they can't clutch pearls and say, oh, how dare you? Leave your religion out of this. Don't force your beliefs down my throat, is what you always hear. And then, like I said, the right, we cow. We are cowed into submission. We say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Let me get God out of here too. And they think, got him right where we want him. Because again, everything that you've heard from all the speakers, everything that you've heard today and tomorrow, what you'll hear tonight, is the left, there's a lot of religious undertones to what they do. It's a rebellion and opposition against reality. And what is reality? It's God's foundation for everything. So whether or not individuals want to accept everything, you have to worship something. Everyone worships something at the end of the day. So there's always a moral framework that's going to win in the end. The left is making sure their moral framework wins, and they're kneecapping us saying, oh, you can't talk about God because that's bringing morality into this. And I'm saying, excuse me, sir, that's all you guys have been doing for decades. You tried to squish us with that. Don't let them hold you down with that. Instead, say, no, a framework, moral framework will win in the end, and I'm going to make darn sure it's God's framework and not yours, because we've seen the destruction, the deaths of despair, the depression, the suicide, the destruction of the family, the abortion, the drug epidemics that we've seen, homelessness. We've seen the fruits of what they've pushed onto us, their morality, lack of is more like it. We've seen what it's done, and we're saying, no, that is not the right way. We're going through history not to look back to be the caveman, but to bring back, like I said, those eternal truths that are always, always true. And we're seeing how that can inform us today. It's that binding of all the generations, everyone past, future, and present. And so we have to understand that. And so, what's my message, the moral of the story? We're coming up on the end here. My moral of the story is God tells us, do not be afraid. I go before you always. So let us be humble enough to actually take him at his word, the all-knowing, all-omnipotent, all-loving, all-good God who made all of us, who loves us all more than we could ever even imagine. Let us take him at his word, be humble enough to accept that, and to take that with us through everything that we see and do, and not be afraid. To not be afraid, like I said, he goes before us always. So God bless. Thank you guys so much for giving me some of your time this morning. It's been fun.